Crossed.
Okay, I'm seeing it.
All
Chris,
right.
I'm seeing it on YouTube.
Excellent. All right, welcome everybody to our December members meeting and informational forum. I just want to say happy holidays to everybody and welcome. As the year comes to an end, this has been a great inaugural year for the coalition. We did 2 candidate forums during the primary season, a traffic safety forum, a land use and construction forum, a local business forum, and now tonight we're doing a congestion pricing forum as promised. I think you all know the coalition was established to support block associations and community groups and share information, and congestion pricing is one of those issues, and that's what we're seeking to do tonight. So with that, I ask you guys to mute, because if you're getting the YouTube live stream, it's going to be echoey. So with that, I'm going to introduce Liz DeVito, our programming chair, and she's going to take it off with our esteemed panelist.
Great.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, and welcome to our final forum of 2021. We're working on our schedule for 2022. We think we have some exciting programs coming up in the first half of the year, first quarter, I should say. So look for messages about those programs coming up. But tonight, we are very honored and pleased to have an expert on congestion pricing, Mr. Charles Komenov. I'm going to try to introduce you, Charles, and I'm sure you could do a better job of introducing yourself. What I will just briefly say, you are an energy policy analyst, transport economist, and environmental activist in New York City. And you also were at the center of reinvigorating transportation alternatives in the 1980s. You've got quite a long resume of very exciting things that you've done in terms of community service and getting things going. But why don't you introduce yourself also for the crowd and let us know in your own words what you
Liz,
do.
that's really kind of you. I lived on the Upper West Side from the mid 70s into the early 80s at 420 West End Avenue and then at 336 before moving downtown. I lived in Soho and now I live in Tribeca. I have an office on Beaver Street, which is near Wall Street. I'm married with 2 grown sons who both live in Brooklyn, unsurprisingly. I did a lot of work in energy policy in the 70s and the 80s. I'm old enough that I actually worked in the tail end of the Lindsay administration, John V. Lindsay, of which I'm very proud. And then in the mid 80s, I almost on a whim, having no idea what I was getting myself into, I seized an opportunity to take the reins at Transportation Alternatives and led it as a volunteer. There wasn't really money to pay me or anybody else for half a dozen years from the mid 80s into the early 90s. And that piqued my interest in transportation. And it catalyzed a conversion in my career away from the electricity sector or the energy sector to urban transport, especially in New York City. And I was always intrigued by the idea of congestion pricing because it seemed to me to satisfy, a couple of things for me. One is an opportunity to bring about a city that would be less car dependent, and also to create a robust revenue source for public transit. And we're going to get into some of the mechanics of that. But also the idea of using price as a way to induce changes in the structure of our city and in the behavior of those of us who live here in a positive way. And it always seemed weird to me that driving in the heart of Manhattan, the most transit-rich place in the hemisphere and the most congested place in the hemisphere, as well as a great concentration of wealth where people could afford to continue driving even in the face of a toll, so that we could charge, at least in theory, a toll great enough to raise large amounts of money to refloat the economics of the subway system, which we desperately need. And we all know that the short-term infusions of funds that Senator Schumer has been able to wizardly engineer for New York City, and it's been a godsend, that's just short-term, it's temporary, it's going to run out. But anyway, beginning in 07 and 08, I began constructing an Excel spreadsheet model that by the time that Governor Cuomo, 10 years later in 2017, announced his conversion to the idea of congestion pricing, my model was the tool that Cuomo's staff, or the state of New York's staff, that was charged with figuring out what would congestion pricing look like, what kind of toll would be needed to generate a significant amount of revenue, and how much would it cut down on traffic congestion. It was my spreadsheet tool that the governor's staff turned to and used for about a year and a half in the whole run-up to passing the congestion pricing legislation in 2019. And I'm proud of that. I had no dealings myself with the governor. There were many layers between him and me, but I'm proud that my tool was the one that was used to scope out congestion pricing. Just as I'm proud to be a grassroots, a member of Transalt now, and a grassroots supporter of the Riders Alliance and of the whole galaxy of civic-minded transportation advocates whose public pressure is what got the governor to convert to congestion pricing in 2017, and what got the legislation passed in 2019 that was supposed to bring about congestion pricing now, except that COVID intervened and the Trump administration, no surprise, just sort of stonewalled on it. But now we've got a framework in place that could see congestion pricing implemented at the beginning of 2023. And I guess I'm here to outline what I think that will look like, what I think we all want it to look like, and why it could be a terrific thing for New Yorkers in every neighborhood, not regardless of whether we live in the zone, as I do, or just outside the zone, as most of you do. Anyway, that's a lot of talking. I should pause.
Well, no, that's great. I was thinking that we never really know how much our audience knows and does not know about the topic that we're addressing in a particular forum. I was wondering if you could just start by laying out what is congestion pricing, how would it work? Even as I was reading all the materials that you forwarded, I had questions like, well, how does the toll even get charged to a plate? So can you spend a few minutes on that?
Yeah, well, thanks, Liz.
Okay.
The idea is, that every private auto and every truck driven from north or east of 60th Street and or east of the East River, from Brooklyn or Queens, is going to be charged a toll. The toll is going to vary between cars and trucks. It's going to vary by time of day and day of week. Exactly how much remains to be determined, although I have some ideas of what it's kind of going to look like. The toll is going to be charged electronically. 95% of all the car and truck traffic on, you could say, the Robert Moses bridges and tunnels, the 7 bridges and 2 tunnels that are owned and operated by the Triborough Bridge and Tunnel Authority of the MTA. 95% of those tolls are collected by Easy Pass. I even have an Easy Pass, even though I don't own a car.
I do too.
Yeah. And before Avis and Hertz, put the Easy Passes in vehicles, I may have been the first person to get an Easy Pass in New York State who didn't own their own car. And I still have it. For the 5% who don't, their license plate is going to be photographed. And assuming that the license plate hasn't been defaced or covered, which is becoming a thing that we're probably all aware of and concerned about, then for those 5%, the license plate will be photographed, and those car owners will be told by mail, TOLLED, and they'll pay more because the system, costs more. Easy Pass is a very well-established thing. And by the way, when people sometimes make comparison to London or Stockholm and how much it costs for them to charge the toll, well, they didn't have Easy Pass. We do. So even though there is some deadweight loss from having to administer and collect the tolls, it's a pretty small thing in the scheme of things. And you'll see that in the one chart that we're going to look at later. The idea is that if we can, if the toll dissuades 15% of the trip takers that now drive in and out of the central business district, that now drive in and out of Manhattan below 60th Street, if 15% of those trips disappear, we get a better than 15% improvement in travel speeds. Now I'm going to contradict myself because as we all know, an awful lot of the traffic in the zone isn't cars or trucks driving in, it's Ubers, Lyfts, and yellow cabs. They're probably about half. And so what it really comes down to is that we're trying to eliminate maybe just 7 or 8% of the trips, and that will result in a 15 or 16% improvement in travel speeds in the zone, and about 7 or 8% on the routes to the zone, like the Upper West Side, like the Upper East Side, like Long Island City and downtown Brooklyn, and East and West and Central Harlem. So that's a big deal, and you'll see that in that one chart, that there's just as much time saved on the approaches to the central business district as in the central business district itself. So this is not congestion pricing, a scheme to just benefit people like me who live in the zone. But then consider the 85% of the trips that remain. They become a source of revenue that can be used to bond the current and the next MTA capital plan, so that we can have things like communications-based train control, the 21st century digital train controls, rather than the century-old analog systems that we now have that force the transit authority to run its trains at slower than necessary speeds, for safety, so that we can have our subway lines, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, L, Q, M, A, B, C, et cetera, F, that they'll be able to handle 30 trains an hour rather than 20 or 22 or 24. That's a big deal. And that we can install elevators at better than half a dozen or a dozen stations a year, which is a terribly slow pace, and denies a huge number of New Yorkers the ability to easily access the fastest way to get around the city, which is the subway. So, I say that in response to the understandable question, well, is congestion pricing a way to raise money for the subways, or is it a way to thin the traffic stream? It's both. That getting rid of 15% of the trips in and out is going to thin out the traffic stream and enable buses, ambulances, trucks, people with van, man with van and woman with van, to travel faster, so that on a given day, instead of just being able to service like 4 or 5 jobs in the heart of the city, they'll be able to service like one more, which will more than easily offset their toll. So it's really hard to find a loser in congestion pricing. And, behavioral economics, for which Daniel Kahneman, who lives not that far from me, won the Nobel about, 15 years ago. It teaches how resistant we are to change, how loss and risk averse we are. Machiavelli wrote about this 500 years ago, that it's easy to identify losers, know who they are, and they tend to scream loud. I guess that losers cry louder than winners sing. And I think that almost all of us are set to be winners. We breathe, we're going to be winners. We want to cross the street, we're going to be winners. We care about the climate and carbon emissions, we're going to be winners. We hate horn honking and unnecessary car noise, we're going to be winners. But most importantly, we're stuck in slow traffic, getting to that medical appointment, getting to visit our grandmother or grandson, stuck, in an ambulance to get to the hospital. Now, congestion pricing isn't going to eliminate all these problems, but it's going to go a long way toward ameliorating them. And I think it's going to create a change in the climate of feeling of what New York and our city are like. It's going to be a great step in the way to making us a more democratic and pluralistic and sustainable city. So I'm a big fan, but when I do the numbers, and we'll drag out that chart soon or at some point.
Sure.
If there's anything I care about, like even more than a democratic city and a sustainable city and a fair and equitable city, this is going to sound crazy. I care about numbers. I've cared about them since it was Duke versus Willie versus Mickey, in the 50s about center fielders. And I was the guy who, dragged out the numbers to support my guy. And, you can maybe guess who that was. I'm a Jackie Robinson kind of guy. So I want the numbers to be right. So I don't push them into places where they can't go.
Well, should we look at the numbers, Chris? Can you share the chart?
Wow, thank
Yeah,
you.
tell
That's
us where
great.
we are, Charles.
Well, so the thing to look at is these 8 bars. The tall bar, the tallest bar that's above the line it's toward the right, it's not all the way at the right, is saved time. I call it drivers, but it is drivers. It's truck drivers, car drivers, car passengers, Uber and Lyft and yellow cab passengers. They're all going to get to where they want to go faster. And my model, which this is all from this Excel spreadsheet that I was raving about earlier, and it's all predicated on a particular scenario that I think is going to satisfy the legislated requirement from 3 years ago that the congestion pricing plan generate $1 billion a year in new revenue. So these are time savings that I monetize by putting values of time on the different people who travel. And then just to the left of that, that double blue thing is save time by transit users. The dark blue, kind of toward the bottom, which isn't very tall, is bus riders being able to travel faster. And the sort of sky blue, which is much larger, is how subway trips are going to be faster because the investment of congestion revenues in improving the subways is going to make them run faster, smarter, and better. To the left of that is environmental stuff. There are 5, layers on that cake, and it's less noise, fewer deadly crashes, cleaner air, less carbon, and less oil being taken out of the ground to satisfy, to fill the engines of cars and trucks and such. And interestingly, that cake, although it's not small, it's much less than the time savings. And I kind of enjoy that. I'm a real tree hugger, but I like playing against type, and I like being able to say that congestion pricing isn't an environment plan quite as much as it's an efficiency and congestion busting and time saving plan that's going to make New York run and work so much better that it will be a lot easier to retain and attract businesses and households, which we really need.
Mm-hmm.
To the left of that is wellness. And the idea there is that more of us are going to feel comfortable and happy and emboldened to walk and ride bikes with less traffic. And I'm able to monetize that as well. all the way to the far left is the Toll and Fare Administration. And I guess what that's saying is that it's only going to cost about $100 million a year to amortize and then operate on an annual basis, the fare administration system. And then finally, the thing I skipped over a little bit in between, the second bar that's also below the line is unwanted mode shifts. That's an item I'm kind of proud of intellectually, because that's the lost amenity for drivers of the trips that they're going to stop taking by car into the heart of the city because they don't want to pay the toll. And I point to that as a way of, I guess, burnishing my credentials, that even though the disappearance of those trips is good for everybody else, it does exact a cost. It represents a cost to the people who now take those trips, who are going to take fewer of them. And it wouldn't be quite honest to ignore that. So that's in there as well, but it's a pretty small item. The big thing below the line, toward the right, almost all the way to the right, is the user fees. And there's no way, getting around the fact that people are going to be spending money on those tolls. And by the way, some of that stuff that's below the line is money that's already being spent, because as most of us know, beginning in 2019, the MTA began collecting surcharges on Ubers and Lyfts of $2.75 per trip that they touch the Manhattan taxi zone, which is Manhattan south of 110th on the west side and south of 96th on the east side, and $2.50 for yellow cabs. I happen to think that that's a pretty stupid policy. It would have been much better to hold off and include the Ubers and the yellows and the Lyfts in a intelligent way that, I'm not going to go into now. We can do that in the discussion period. But, I don't run the legislature or the governor's office. And though that toll has been collected pretty much for the last 3 years, and it's still being collected. And I think it would be unjust to put Ubers, yellows, and Lyfts in the congestion pricing in addition to those surcharges. And I've written that I think that would be a bad thing and an unfair thing. But anyway, those user fees are, most of it, the orange stuff, is what private drivers are going to be required to pay under congestion pricing. And I just want to say, and this is sort of my last thing in my long exposition, I don't take that lightly. Moving $1 billion a year from one set of people to another, or charging it for a certain behavior, in this case, driving it into the heart of the city, is not something to be taken lightly. And anybody who tries to say, oh, nobody's going to pay the toll, or it's all going to be yahoos from, Orange County or Suffolk County or whatever, that's really kind of baloney. And it's also kind of, it rankles. I take it really seriously, the idea of, being part of an effort to charge, a little over $1 billion a year for a certain activity that's now being done for free. Even though I think it's a good idea, I like to feel I'm a little bit humble about it because we're asking a lot when we do that. And I wouldn't be part of it unless I could believe that this was going to be a really good thing. And I guess maybe the last thing to say is I want you to look at that horizontal figure that's kind of toward the right here, that
3.5 billion.
Yeah, about $3.5 billion. Well, you know what that means? It means that every day we don't have congestion pricing. If you divide that figure by 365, we're leaving $10 billion on the table. $10 million a day of benefits of faster travel and cleaner air and fewer of us being hit or killed by drivers and fewer of us biking and walking because it feels so mean out there. We're leaving that on the table, and I don't want to do that anymore.
Great. Does somebody in the Zoom room have a question? I thought I heard a voice. Maybe that was just, somebody settling in. Aaron? I think you're on mute, Aaron.
What would be the investment the city will have to invest to set up the infrastructure and get the thing running?
So remember, Aaron, it's not the city, it's the MTA,
MTA.
which the legislation charges with doing this. It might cost, and hey, given the MTA, it probably will, as much as $250 million for the extra computer work, as well as the structures. This is really what you're asking, at several dozen different entry points and maybe exit points. We're lucky there aren't that many. London has 390 locations with cameras. We're just going to have like 30 or 40. But to be really conservative in my numbers, I'm assuming it's going to cost $250 million, which in my analysis, I amortize that on a straight line basis over a 5-year period. So it's $50 million in capital per year. And then the operating cost, because you got to process, like 500,000 transactions a day, and you got to adjudicate a certain number of people who are going to say that, you're charging me and, you got it wrong. That's another 60 or 70 million. So it works out to a little over $100 million a year to amortize and operate that. So yeah, it's a deadweight loss, but it's, probably like 8 to 10% of the whole shooting match, which is manageable.
It's a good question, Aaron. Thanks. Does anybody else have a question right now for Charles? Steve? Yeah. You're on mute.
Hello, Charles. It's good to see you again. For those of us who have been both journalists or advocates for these issues, we've heard you for many years, and you are an agent of transformation, and we recognize that. And all those that data about your history and charts and all that are important and recognized. But you are someone who I think many of us who've been working on these issues for a long time see
if this guy starts bringing guns into the house,
player.
I'm going to pay
someone.
I'm going to pay for my son to move out.
Oh.
I think Terrence needs
Terrence?
to. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. He's muted. So Charles, when we formed the coalition, the heart of it is block associations and neighborhood groups, because we wanted to have a more of a standing and how to empower block associations and neighborhood groups to play a part in our civic life. And I think that even those of us who are in favor of what you have been proposing and studying and have successfully moved the agenda forward, I think those of us on the Upper West Side have expressed to me, and I feel, a tremendous concern about one issue that I think is at the forefront. And that is, if I can say it very simply, we are concerned that the Upper West Side will be turned into the largest open parking lot in Manhattan or maybe New York City, and that people who we would welcome to our city to come and work and contribute and all of that, coming from New Jersey and Connecticut and Westchester, will see the Upper West Side as the parking lot to go to, and that we are an already congested community. We are already fighting for streetscape. We have restaurants, we have bike lanes, we have so much going on that we are already congested and concerned. So we need congestion relief. And our concern is that we see all of us who live north of 60th Street, oh my God, what is happening next? And what can we do as block associations, as neighborhood groups, and as citizens of the Upper West Side to figure out a strategy to cope with this challenge?
Well, thanks, Steve. And I knew you were going there, and it's wise and understandable and appropriate that you went there. You are channeling the feelings of a lot of people. That's why you're good at what you do. So let me try to answer on two levels. One is analytically, and then the other is going to be more holistic. So the analysis I've done, and I admit that this is not going to be really that persuasive to many of you, most of you. It's just numbers, and it's numbers that for me don't have quite the solidity of those bars that we were looking at just a moment ago. But what I basically did was a time and motion analysis of somebody who now drives into the Manhattan Central Business District, the charging zone, from anywhere. But I guess for you guys, we're talking about people driving from the north or a little bit from the northeast, right? A little bit of New Jersey out in Bergen County, somebody coming over the George, or Westchester, and maybe to a lesser extent, Connecticut, like Greenwich, Connecticut, because it's not going to be people coming from Long Island. And those who do, there's a parallel concern on the part of people who live in Long Island City and downtown Brooklyn. I sort of costed out how much time is it going to take for people to hunt and find a space on the Upper West Side, or to go into a garage, and how much are they going to have to pay for that? And then how much time and money are they going to spend hopping on the subway or in an Uber to get down into the zone, which is where they're going now and where they want to go? And what's the inconvenience to them? There's that whole thing in transportation that people want a one-seat ride. People don't like to have to segment their trip into 2 or 3 parts. So I sort of did this, and with a whole bunch of ranges of people's value of time and comfort and all of that. And what I ended up concluding was that there'd be maybe a 1% increase in, that 1% of the people driving in from out there through you and the Upper East would do that. And it came down to, for all those communities, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, Upper East Side, Upper West Side, no more than 1,000 cars a day total. Now, how that hits you, first of all, you could just say, like, why should we believe you? And I don't have a response to that, because, I'm not even sure how much I believe myself. It's just that I did the numbers in good faith. But you might also say, oh my God, 1,000 cars, even if it's spread among those 4 neighborhoods. So that's like 250 or 300 for us. And we're, X hundred blocks. I have not tried to sort of segment that to a per block basis. I don't even know if I would know how to do that. And I know you feel like you're at a breaking point and you don't want another single goddamn one. And I get that. But you're also going to have fewer cars passing through, period. And maybe not fewer cars parking, but fewer cars driving through, because that 15% of the coming in traffic and then going back out at the end of the day, that is going to disappear in order to raise the amount of money that the legislation requires, is going to mean somewhat fewer cars coming down Amsterdam, Columbus, West End, Riverside, and even the West Side Highway and Central Park West. That's the sort of analytical number. The bigger thing is to say that, the whole parking thing in your neighborhood and my neighborhood and the whole city is pretty much broken. And it's unfortunate that couldn't be solved before this happened. And we can get into that a little bit further, but I'm going on too long.
Well, I'm looking at the chat room on YouTube, and there are quite a few comments coming in support of resident parking. And, you were kind enough to respond to an individual before this forum tonight. And I just wondered if you might want to address that for the number of people who are saying that we need resident parking on the Upper West Side.
Well, I'm one of those people too. I'm totally for it. I'm for it in every neighborhood in the city. And again, it's really unfortunate that couldn't get done before congestion pricing. But, and Liz, you're waiting for me to drop the other shoe, right? Because
Sure.
we did talk about this.
Yeah.
Why didn't it get done? Well, you could say because, government or city government seems to have a hard time getting a lot of things done. Although, with transportation, that's not totally the case. We got fair fares, the half price Metro cards for, low income households. We got a lot of speed cams and red light cams that have contributed to better, blah, blah, blah. But the ineluctable problem with these residential parking permits is that although nobody knows, and I'm just now making a number, I'm pulling it out of my ear. I haven't studied it in detail, but it might very well be, Liz, that those residential parking permits, for everybody who wants one to have one, they might end up costing $300 or $400 a month. Because if they were priced at only 100 or 150, which is probably what people kind of have in mind, like, oh yeah, if it was 100, by the way, that siren is on my end. I can't do anything about it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
If it was going to be only 100 or 150 a month, I bet that the residential parking permit program would be so oversubscribed that people wouldn't be able to get the guaranteed, high parking probability that ought to come with the fee that people would be paying. We're a vertical city. There's a lot of us living in these wonderful 4-story, 10-story, 20-story buildings that we have. And the geometry just isn't there, I suspect, to enable everybody who would want a relatively affordable parking permit to have one. We don't have the room. And I think that's sort of why it hasn't been done to date, because our elected officials haven't been willing to be honest about that.
Right. Yeah. I'm just looking at the conversation here. Yeah. Well, I won't get into the details there, but one of the things I read was that congestion pricing could lead to the reduced cost of parking in garages in this central business district. One of the articles that I read. But I wonder if that could lead to increased prices in neighborhoods like the Upper West Side for garages.
Oh, in other words, that the people, why would it
like a
lead
supply
to
and demand? Yeah.
Well, that some of the, like the Scarsdale drivers would again park, on 80th Street or 96th Street rather than driving all the way in.
Local residents might end up paying more for parking in a garage than.
I guess I'm not seeing sort of why that would be. If somebody else can sort of chart that through, and maybe I'm just not don't have my thinking cap on. The only way that would happen that I can see would be if, Sue or Steve from Scarsdale, drove in and didn't want to put up with the on-street parking hassle and went for the garage. But that's the kind of thing that I analyzed in my modeling. Again, my modeling, which I admit may not be all that persuasive. I looked at both on-street parking, which would be, from the Scarsdale folks, which would be cheaper but would take longer, versus the garage parking, which wouldn't take as long, but would be more expensive. And, I looked at sort of both, and I still ended up with only, fewer than 1,000 people citywide from all corners opting for that.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions from the Zoom room?
Steve has his hand up.
Oh, okay.
Hey, thanks, Liz, Chris. Charles, we understand that you don't have all the answers, but we want to be part of figuring out the solutions. We want to know, how can we play a constructive role as community members? Where do we get to participate in how this is rolled out? Because I think many people feel congestion pricing is coming, that part of it is a done deal. And maybe that's a good thing after a decade of discussion, that we actually see something that makes sense. But this problem for the Upper West Side is not insignificant. It is a threat to the quality of life and to some people, the economic life. So we need to use the same deftness, the same research, the same insight, the same creativity that you and others have come together in charting us forward with the transportation changes in the last generation to come up with a way to make this work. This is not Stockholm and it's not London. So we've got to have a New York way of figuring out what to do. And maybe it needs to be in its own way transformational, just like congestion pricing. I don't know anything about municipal garages. I don't know anything about these issues enough to make a proposal. But I do know that many blocks from 60th all the way north want to participate. And I wonder from you, how do we as community members, how do block associations and neighborhood groups participate in the way this is going to take place in our community?
So, Steve, you know, and many of us in this meeting know, that the legislature did pass the congestion pricing law at the very end of March 2019, so it's almost 3 years ago, which deliberately did not set out the precise parameters of, you know, like what the tolls would be. Okay, and by the way, maybe we should be getting into that at some point. It left to a, I think it's supposed to be a 6-person panel. And sorry, I'm zoning out on the name of this panel. Maybe somebody's got it. Peter, maybe you know it, or the something review, some traffic mobility review board. Is
Traffic,
that it?
yeah.
Okay. And, you know, during the era of the former governor, everybody in sort of my circle of pointy-headed, you know, transportation people just assumed, well, this is, you know, another thing that Andrew Cuomo is putting out there as window dressing. But we all know that this panel, whoever it ends up consisting of, is going to do Andrew Cuomo's bidding. Well, you know, we're in what does seem to be a different kind of New York State political climate now. And that seems to be a much kind of better one and a much more open one. And so this traffic mobility review board, and I'm sorry, I really should be more up to speed on it than I am. I think it's supposed to consist of one person from each borough and then a 6th person who is, I have no idea. You know, but that is going to be, I guess, the, now it only has recommendation powers. It doesn't have sort of statutory authority. But you know, that needs to be appointed soon. Under the legislation and under the previous universe we were in, it was going to be appointed on November 15th, 2020, and then congestion pricing was going to start in January of 2021. So that panel would only have like a 6-week life, which was more evidence that it was going to be basically just a show. So, you know, yeah, that would be a pressure point. But at the same time, Steve, I would really hope that the Upper West Side Coalition could, after studying and going through the concerns, as we're doing to some extent here, would choose to be a strong proponent and would find a way to look toward the prospective benefits as well as the prospective downsides. You know, that $10 million a day worth of benefits to, you know, the city as a whole. You know, Steve, it's not as if every other neighborhood is going to get $11 million a day where the benefits combined, and the Upper West is going to be left losing $1 million a day in terms of something, congestion, crashes, pollution, or whatever. These benefits are going to be fairly well distributed. The closer we get to the zone, the more the benefits are going to be. And, think about the next time you stand on Columbus or the Upper West Side during the morning, or on Amsterdam Avenue, in the evening, look at those cars and think about how many of them are going all the way into the zone. And if we can thin that out by just 15%, it's going to make a pretty big difference. And then it's going to make it easier to do the other things that we all want to do to transform our streets.
Okay. Aaron, you're on mute still. You're still on mute. Aaron, you're on mute.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah. Can you give us an idea what it's going to cost to the drivers? A rough idea.
Yes. Well, that's the thing that my model does, really well. Thank you for the question. I figure that a toll of $13 during the peak hours, and by 13, I don't mean 13 in and 13 out. I mean a total of 13. So it might be 6.5 in and 6.5 out. And by the way, Aaron, that would match what the Tri-Borough Bridge and Tunnel Authority charges on its bridges and tunnels, the main one. So it's good to have that kind of, symmetry. If that gets charged during from 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening, and also on some weekend hours, from I think 12 noon to 10 in the evening, which are pretty high traffic. And if it's $4, again, round trip, all the other hours, you can do a million different combinations. It's like chess, but with tolls. That will generate the $1 billion a year in new net revenue that is required in the statute. And it will also improve travel speeds averaged within the zone by about 16%, and on the approaches, like where you guys live, by about 7 or 8%. So think about 13 and 4. Oh, and sorry, and trucks are going to pay more.
Going back to Steve's point about how local organizations can engage in this conversation, I know that there were some public hearings already held about congestion pricing, and I think there are going to be more. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That would definitely be a way for citizens and community organizations to engage in the conversation. Do you have any idea how effective the ones that have already been held have been, in terms of contributing to the environmental impact assessment, for example?
Liz, the
Which
reason
hasn't started. Yeah.
The reason I'm laughing and almost smiling, I've been teaching a seminar in New York City transportation and transit and traffic this semester at Hunter College Roosevelt House. And one of the students' papers is on that very question. What is the public participation process? What does it look like? And is it going to amount to anything? Is it just going to be like show? And she's pretty dour about it. And she's kind of appalled at how uncontemporary it is. And how there doesn't seem to be in place at the MTA, which is running these hearings, sort of systematic process for distilling how much in favor, how much against. What do you like? What do you don't like? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to, there isn't any of that. And yet, I mean, the age that we're living in with all of its drawbacks, if there's anything that it ought to be able to do, it's that kind of thing, data mining.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to be the guy to say, hey, I testified at the hearing. I did my 2 minutes. I did it. but I'm not the guy to say that this is a fabulous thing to do. I think the more effective thing to do is for individuals and community organizations like yours to decide what you really want, what you want this to look like, and to lobby your electeds to carry the water for you.
Yeah, it was very interesting in the article that you co-wrote about in The Nation that you sent the link to. You refer to the guru of congestion pricing of Sweden and his what he calls the valley of politicization,
No,
which is
no, it was better. It was the valley of political death.
That's it. That's right. The valley of political death, which is that valley in between the, I guess, enactment of the law and the reality of the implementation.
Yeah, it's a very Ingmar Bergman kind of thing. That's why Sweden would come up with that.
Yeah, but it was interesting because that could be the period we're going into right now.
Oh, Liz, we're in it.
We're in it? Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
right.
Look, I'm not giving anything away to say that people like me and, Riders Alliance, Regional Planning Association, Transhalt, Tri-State Transportation Campaign, Transit Center, on and it's like rather astounding, this kaleidoscope of groups that we have. We're kind of somewhere between anxious and worried.
Okay.
This valley of political death, I mean, it's more like the valley that Moses and Aaron faced, and back in the day that Schoenberg wrote his opera about, than it is like, crossing the old Red River Valley on, good old Dobbin. We're worried.
Yeah. Okay.
This thing needs like a full-throated support and a kind of attitude of don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. This is not like a perfect plan by anybody's imagination, including mine. But does it have a lot of good? I sure think so.
Okay. I'm looking at the clock. I know
see
you have a hard stop, Charles.
I see Peter's hand's been up. Can we just get
Oh,
a
I'm
quick,
sorry.
question
Okay.
from Peter?
Okay, well, I can never say it as well as Charlie or do it as well as Ingmar Bergman, but I think the bottom line is we know the present situation is really awful when it comes to congestion, danger, and inconvenience to everyone. And the reality that we've all acknowledged here is no one knows for sure what's going to happen under this particular plan. We just take our best educated guesses with very smart people like Charlie and others who are trying to project what might happen, and then we try and tweak them, perhaps using tools from experiences and best practices around the world. So innovations like smart parking in some cities, for example, they know exactly how many parking spaces might be available, how they should be priced. You can be directed to it. And if the city becomes too congested, they actually close it off. And we've actually done that here in New York City during extreme conditions as well. So this isn't a one and done kind of a deal at all. It may be necessary, for example, to expand the congestion zone, further uptown. Maybe it becomes all of Manhattan. But to Steve's point before, it's very important that we all have a seat at the table after this gets put in place. But the biggest enemy here would be to delay this. It's already been delayed way more than is necessary because the present situation, as we know, is just unworkable for everyone. I ride my bicycle up the Hudson River Greenway, and just the West Side Highway just is crawled, and nothing is moving. I can see the traffic on the bridge, and this just doesn't work for anyone the way it is now. So it's not anything that we can afford to ignore. And we really, really, everyone knows that we have to invest enormous amounts of money to modernize and improve our mass transit, that really is the only solution. And finally, so many cars are occupied by only one person, which makes it so much worse. So I was wondering if Charlie could talk a little bit about the benefits if we're going to have other motor vehicles and smaller vehicles, minibuses, cars with more than one occupants, what impact that would have on congestion pricing, and if that couldn't be factored, or is that being factored in your calculations as well? So thanks very much. This has been a great panel.
Thanks, Peter. First of all, it would be great, at least I think it would be great, to charge bigger cars more and smaller cars less. And maybe someday. That's not likely to be in the plan that we do here. It's, the thing is going to be complex enough.
It's more about occupancy, Charlie, is the question.
Well, let me answer that in two ways. One, right now, the average car and truck that's driven into the heart of Manhattan has 1.31 people in it. My modeling projects that that's going to increase to, get this, 1.38. Because of congestion pricing. In other words, it's not radical. I'm not assuming that we're going to double, like if anybody said we're going to double the number of people in the car with congestion pricing, you'd have to say like, they're not credible. But and I may be saying something you don't want to hear, Peter or other people. I strongly and powerfully want to charge the same for a car that has 6 people versus a car that has 1 person. Because if it's got 6 people, that's the discount right there. They can divvy it up. And of course, we all want 6 in a car or 4 in a car and not 1. But as soon as we get into, the thing, if we make this thing too tricky and complicated, it's going to get gamed. And if it gets gamed, then the social compact that's needed to put this thing through and to live with it is going to deteriorate and maybe fall apart, which is one reason that this license plate defacement really scares me and people like me, because it's being done. You've seen it, right? Everybody that I can see in this thing, you've seen, whether it's in real life or on Twitter, license plates that are bent or covered or defaced deliberately so that they can avoid being detected on a speed camera or going over the George Washington Bridge. If that doesn't get controlled, anyway, we've got to keep this thing to a modicum of simplicity, and then we can tweak it, as you said, Peter, going forward. At least
you've convinced me. You've convinced me. That's a great answer on the occupancy. Thanks. As usual, you're right, Charlie.
Any more questions? I don't see. Chris, do you see any hands that I
No,
don't see?
Mr. Komenov's been Dale, yes.
I do have a question. We have a tremendous amount of construction on the west side, and we have certain sites that maybe have 30 trucks or more per day, at least 5 days a week. Are allowances going to be made for these trucks under the construction, or are they going to have to comply with the rules of everyone else?
Well, if these are trucks that are delivering to and are then sitting on, West 79th Street or 86th Street or whatever it is, they're not going to come under the aegis of congestion pricing, which is kind of too bad. I'll tell you, a little story, Dale, and I'm glad you asked because I was having nice eye contact with you for much of the meeting. A couple of years ago, I got contacted by Donald Blinken, who happens to be the father of the current and now Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, who had the same concern. And prodded by him, I looked into the New York City rules and regulations for when construction sites take a certain amount of linear feet out of service for their staging area. You know what they pay? I'm trying to remember because I did this a couple of years ago. It's like for 100 feet worth of linear space, 1 lane worth, they're paying like $120 a month. And they ought to be paying, when you factor in how much that slows down everybody, everybody from ambulances to buses to man with van and ordinary people like us, they ought to be paying like $10,000 a month for that 100 linear feet. And I proposed to then Speaker of the City Council, Corey Johnson, who was retaining me to do some stuff about Ubers and Lyfts, which I did. Let's go after this. And unfortunately, it just sort of didn't have the traction that it might. So this is something that needs to be, there's so many things that we need to do apart from and in addition to congestion pricing. But to me, congestion pricing is one of these policies. It plays well with every other policy that just about all of us want. It's not going to make what you just described or I just described harder to do. And, if anything, it'll make it easier to do by establishing the principle that when we charge an appropriate amount for an activity that's dragging all of us down, people respond, institutions respond, innovation responds. The world changes in ways that some can be predicted, but can't all, as Peter pointed out, be predicted. But a lot of those, I think, are going to be good ways, and anything has got to be better than acting as if all this super valuable and contested real estate has no value, and giving it away for free to the biggest, brawniest, most brutal occupant that seizes it.
Thank you.
Peter's life.
I love your passion. I'm going to hand things over to Chris because I think we're coming to a close for this evening.
And Charles, thank you. You've been very generous with your time. We had promised you that we'd get you out promptly. And
yeah, we're going to buy the Christmas tree now in Tribeca. I got to get on my bike and meet my family. And
thank you so much. We're going to wrap up with some coalition business, and I suspect that in the next year we'll probably be revisiting this topic. So, thank you for giving us a nice kickoff on this.
Thank you very much.
And have a good evening, Charles. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles.
And thank you, Liz, for your fabulous moderation of this and all the research and work that you do. So quickly, just to wrap up, does anybody have any community news that they want to share? And if not, Peter, is that a hand up, or are you cleaning your lens?
Yes. No. I had a hand up. So I sent around to you the announcement from DOT about the applications for open streets that are coming up. They're due in January, and I sent you the link, which I think is also now on your Twitter feed. And they have been running webinars for people who are interested. So I know that it's come up with the coalition before, how other block associations can apply to be open streets. And there's a lot of additional funding, which has already, a lot of this was thanks to Chuck Schumer's money, and that's benefited us here on 103rd Street greatly by having street cleaning on the open street and also tree well plantings. They've already planted 4 new trees on the Broadway block of 103rd Street under this program. So they do have some funds for this, and they're ironing out a lot of the kinks. So now is a very, very good time for those block associations who are interested in applying as open streets. It does not need to be perfect, but they are happy to work with you, and it does have to be in by January 20th. So I know we had talked about doing a formal presentation, but those who are interested should really get in touch with DOT now. The application is not that complicated, and they do have these webinars which they have taped that they've recorded that will help you a lot in terms of filling out the forms. So that was it.
Great. Thank you for that. Anybody else have anything they'd like to share from their neck of the neighborhood? And if not, here's a few events I just wanted to highlight. Tomorrow, the 20th Precinct Sector A is doing a Build the Block meeting at 6 p.m. If you're interested, please reach out to the precinct, and you'll get the Zoom coordinates. That's Sector A, Build the Block tomorrow, 6 p.m. Sunday, December 19th, between 5 and 6:30 p.m. We're doing a in-person meet and greet. I think you've all seen the information. It's at the Art House hotel bar, lobby bar, and just bring your vaccine card, your mask, and it'll be a cash bar. December 20th, the coalition is co-sponsoring with the Assemblymember Rosenthal a Rat Academy. The link has been in communication shared with you. It's at 5:30 on Monday, December 20th. And please know that going into the new year, we're going to be shifting these monthly meetings to the third Tuesday of the month. That we're going to remain virtual for the next few months. And as always, please share your newsletter submissions with Dee. And thank you all. One last chance for anybody to share community news. No, going once, going twice, going three times. We look forward to seeing you if you can join us on Sunday. Otherwise, happy holidays and happy New Year. And we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Happy holidays, everybody. Happy New Year.
Thank you all.
Forum, Liz, really good work.
Thank you.
Really great.
Thank you.
Thank you so
was a
much.
good- I thank Chris for finding Charles Komenov. Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Yeah.
Good night,
Okay.
everybody.
Well done.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Good night. Happy holidays.